Hello everyone, today I will describe how to write different sections in software engineering papers. There are several sections in software engineering papers including introductions, backgrounds, motivating examples, and then methodology. Background is actually optional. Sometimes you can actually include backgrounds in methodology. Like in my example here, we have GitHub and GitHub Classrooms part of the methodology. So we will give some backgrounds of what exactly GitHub, what is GitHub Classroom, for those who are not familiar with this. And then there is evaluation sections, track to validity, lesson learned. Lesson learned sections usually is needed in experience report. So if you're writing an experience report, you usually need to add these sections. And then there is related work and conclusion. Track to validity sections is very important for software engineering paper, but then there are many people who actually forget to write these track to validity sections, which may invite criticism from reviewers. So this section should be there. And then in terms of which section is the easiest to write, I would say the evaluation section is the most easiest to write because it has some common structure. Hi everyone, so now we will talk about how to write evaluation section. Since it's the easiest to write, we actually follow a particular structure. You can look at this first paragraph of this evaluation section. You will see that we start with to our best knowledge. This is the first approach. So we are explaining why we do not have a suitable baseline. Usually you will have a suitable baseline, and then you will maybe have several suitable baseline, and then you have maybe A, B, C, and then you want to explain why you choose to evaluate against A. So this is the explanations about why you are choosing this. Usually in terms of explanations, you have several reasons for doing certain things. So you will have some long sentence like this: filter, issue, search, and select. So I always recommend using this structure like because or for very long sentence with several parts. So you can split it with using this numbering 1, 2, and 3, and 4 to make it easy for people to see what are their recommended or what are the reasons that you are describing. And then after that we go to this again very standard sentence that you can actually choose to vary a bit. We can say we perform evaluations to address the following research questions. We evaluate to answer the following research questions, the research question below. So you can choose either way. Usually I choose a shorter way when I run out of space, and I just say we evaluate to address the research question below because that is actually the shortest. And then we have the RQ3A and the RQ3B. And then we go to one of these parts, that is the experimental setup part. I want to explain the structure for this paragraph in experiment setup. The structure here, note that we use the active voice always in the structure. We always say that we evaluate, we select. So we first say answer the questions what you evaluate on. So usually say we evaluate on how many of the apps, how many programs. You can also say if it is from a particular benchmark, you can say in benchmark A, B, and C. And then we have the table. The table is also very standard because usually we'll have some tables showing the statistics. One thing to have in the table is 2 lines of code. The lines of code usually give a sense of how big is the programs that you are actually evaluating against. So what you evaluate on, and then we have the structure table X. we use list in the paragraph. We can actually use a variety like illustrates, shows, represents, lists. I think that there are many ways to say this. Usually I use choose from this list. So list informations or show statistics about the evaluated apps. And then sometimes we want to also explain a particular column. Like for example, the rating column, we don't really sure, just looking at title, we are not sure what is the rating means. So here we actually mentions that the rating column denotes the downloads, and the rating column denote the number of downloads and the rating in Google Play. So we are clear that this is rating in particularly Google Play. And then after that, we say why we select these apps. We and here we say we select these apps because they are diverse in size. Usually say this is diverse, or if you are actually using a benchmark, we just say that we select this benchmark because it was like commonly used in prior evaluations of XYZ. And then we also say about this outlier, because when you look at the table that I have just mentioned, in this table, one thing is very obvious is this NA. And then the reviewer will be thinking, what is this NA? What does it mean? So we start to explain before they ask us about this. So we say that although this is not available to download, we choose this app because this is the most recently. So this is why we select, why we did not select an outlier, why we select an outlier according to app, or why we did not select particular apps or programs from that benchmark because we failed to run this or certain thing like that. We need to explain if we do not run the benchmark fully, what is the reason behind. And then we go ahead and list the metrics that we evaluate against. So we say that we use 2 metrics used in prior evaluation. So here we also include the citations. So but in the papers, there are many citations, and then there are many papers, many related works that you want to look at. But in this case, because we are only referring to this 2 papers, because they are recommendation systems, so we don't really need to go and look into each sentence in these 2 papers about what it does. We just want to understand what are the standard metrics that is being used. Here we have the standard metrics. Please note that just because you are citing that paper, this doesn't mean that you can copy directly what is the definitions. Usually I still recommend changing a little bit, replacing, paraphrasing the words, because we want to avoid from plagiarism or copying their text directly. This is a bad practice. We shouldn't do this. And then after this, we basically, after the definition of the metrics, we go for the machine configuration. Machine configuration is important, especially for those papers that care about performance. So here we say that all experiments were conducted on a machine. So this is probably the only parts in the paper I'm writing in passive voice, but you can still make it an active voice, like we conduct these experiments on a machine, so or conduct all experiment in this machine, so it can make everything into an active voice to be safe. And then let me show an example of this subsections for a particular RQ. So how you describe this 2 graph here. Usually, again, you start with the structure. You mention directly the 2 figure, like figure 12 and figure 13 shows. And then there are certain things like columns to like rated A and B, why we include this for better comparison. And then for a graph like this, usually you choose the range of values. So here we say that this range from 0.1 to 0.7. And then we also explain this because we want to, for those who are not really understanding what is this precision at 10 means, we want to explain what this means. And then after explaining this value, we compare it with other baseline. Usually if you have a baseline, you compare it with other baseline. Here we don't have a baseline, so we want to compare this value with other previous recommendation systems. And then we say that these values are relatively high. The relatively high here is an important phrase because people like to use some other phrase that invite criticism. For example, significantly high is actually problematic because significantly high here have special meaning. They may ask you what is whether this result is statistically significant. What kind of statistic significant test that you use? So if you do not actually use any statistical significant test, so please do not use significantly high for this. And for another things that students like to use, there are the strong words. If you use very strong words like extremely high, obviously high, very high, those words are too extreme, too strong of the words. Usually you don't have such strong results. Even if you have very strong results, you still want to be modest. So the key things I always like to use is relatively high because we are comparing against another approach. We will say that they are relatively high, and then this indicates that our approach is quite it can recommend relevant issues are quite effective. You can use these words, but try to be modest. So apart from using the range here, we also use another thing is we pick the outlier again, the smallest or the things with relatively low value, and then trying to explain this. So this shows how to analyze a figure using the range, explaining these different results. And then at the end, we are actually have one box. This kind of box or frame here is actually oftentimes used to highlight the results. Here we can see directly what is the number of bugs, total number of bugs that we found. So these are very important for usually testing approach, or like whether you are comparing against another approach, you will say that this shows that this outperform other approach in terms of what and metrics and what metrics. So you usually want to highlight this in this box. So that's all for this illustration about what to write in an evaluation.